Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to paint rust. For this, I'm using Necromunda bases, as I think they're going to look really nice with a rusted effect. So to begin with, I'm using AK Rust over a black primer. The AK Rust is actually a primer itself, which means obviously you can just go straight onto the model or the base, whatever you want to make rusty. So usually for priming, I usually would run it through my airbrush. However, this paint in particular has little bits in it, so I don't want to put any of that into my airbrush. Instead, I'm just stippling it on with a large dry brush. The reason for the stippling is because I want to make a little bit more texture, plus while stippling you can build up the layers and get a nice solid layer. So in this video I'm going to show you multiple different products for using and creating the effect of rust. The main product used is going to be Dirty Down Rust, and this is going to be the base for all of my rust effects. I'll link all the rust products that I use in the description below. So to begin with, I'm just throwing on a bunch of Dirty Down Rust, and what I like to do is put on like a big blob and then I come in and water it down a bit. In this current example, I'm using Vallejo Special Effects Rust. This is a bit of a lighter brown to the Dirty Down Rust, and I'm just putting it in random locations, just not really thinking about it too much. And this is what's going to give a different texture and look to the rust. So this paint is somewhat thick, and I do thin it down, but I still just blob it on there because I then come in with a wet brush and just spread it out and thin down the paint. It's completely up to you how you do it though. As well as using the Special Effects Rust, I use the Special Effects Galvanic Corrosion, and this is more of like an orangey brown. Now, I actually really like this effect, and out of the products that I use, this is probably my favorite in combination with the Dirty Down Rust. Same thing with this paint though, I am literally just putting it on and just throwing it everywhere, getting it everywhere, not really thinking about the placement. I'm just putting it on and seeing what happens, as well as mixing it in with the previous rust layer and the Dirty Down. I just think it gives a nice varied look. So once that first layer is dried, Dirty Down usually dries quite glossy, so it will look a bit wet still, but it's probably not. So usually the Galvanic Corrosion dries when it's within the Dirty Down, it dries quite dark. So in this clip I'm just going over the locations where I placed the Galvanic Corrosion previously, and I'm just putting another layer, a thin down layer of Galvanic Corrosion over the top again. And here I'm just taking my time, I'm not going too crazy, I'm putting it in some other locations potentially, it depends how I'm thinking it's looking. Obviously, if you think you're putting on too much, you can come back in with the Dirty Down and you come back in with the rust effect and try balance it out a bit more. So I'll just be going in with the brush and placing some of the Galvanic Corrosion on, and then I'll just come in with a wet brush, got a bit of water on there, not too much, and then I'll just thin out the layers. So as you can see, it is fairly dark once it's all dried. So now what we're going to do is come in with Luminous Orange, which is from AK. I've watered this down quite a bit, you can obviously use water or a medium, and I'm just putting it inside of the locations of the previous Galvanic layer, and I'm just going to be sort of like layering it up. However, we don't want to put an excessive amount onto the base, as we do want the other mixtures of corrosion and rust and Dirty Down to come through. Also, I forgot to mention that I am using I think it's a size 1 brush. It's a very old brush, so I can't actually remember, but I think it's size 1. For this next step, it's completely optional. To be honest, this whole entire thing is optional. You can stop, start, finish wherever you want. But right now, I'm adding some orange fluorescent paint. The reason for this is because rust isn't just dull colors, it can be very bright. So adding in that fluorescent paint gives you that really high saturation and it gives you a nice contrast. Now I'm using this very sparingly. On a couple of the other bases I go a bit crazy with it and it's a bit too much, as you'll see in the end clip. However, if you use it very sparingly and just add like little dots to the center of the previous layer, it shouldn't be too bright. Next up is dry brushing, and all I'm using for this is Leadbelcher, and I'm going to be lightly dry brushing the whole entire base. I'm trying to leave all of the rusted orangey effects exposed while trying to get a nice worn and battered look. So for this next part I'm just using Thrash metal, and I've got a bit of sponge, and all I'm doing with this is trying to create some scratches. I do this by getting a bit of paint on the sponge and then dabbing it off, similar to how you would dry brush. Then all I'm doing is doing some very short, sharp movements. And again, I'm doing this very sparingly, as I don't want the metal to shine too much, but I still want it to look very worn, very battered. Next up, similar to how I set up the initial base, I done a black primer with a rust primer base coat. After that I had then added some Dirty Down rust, but now we're going and using AK pigments. So at the moment I'm just using dark rust, and with this I'm just placing it all over the base. I'm putting it in the Dirty Down, I'm putting it on the base itself. So when using pigments they can be very messy, so I definitely suggest getting a nice place to work. That won't matter if you cause a bit of a mess. And once you've applied some of the pigment, you want to get a wet brush and just dab it down and make sure the powder it doesn't go everywhere. For the next step, I'm just using light rust AK pigments, and all I'm doing with this is placing it around. Again, I'm just doing it very random, making sure I've got a variety of color all over the base. Again, if you're doing this on an actual model itself, you can do exactly the same. It doesn't have to be like uniform. You want to make it random. So all you want to do with the pigments is just make sure you've got like a nice amount on there, not too much, and just dab it all over the base. And once you've dabbed it all over the base, it's going to be quite dusty, so this is where you want to be careful, and you want to start getting some water over the top and making sure to try and seal the pigments in. Just to pre-warn you, these will become activated again if you put extra water in them or if you put another paint over the top of them, but that's fine because it will create a cool little blend. I'll keep these next steps short, but again, all I'm doing is coming in with Luminous orange and just being very gentle and working very slow and just placing the orange in the recesses and in all of the lighter rust areas. Now I'm just coming in with Fluorescent orange. Now you want to be, again, as I said, be very careful and try not to use too much. So in this next step, again, I'm just using Leadbelcher, but you can use any sort of metallic color you want. And I'm just coming in and just doing a light dry brush over the top. So the main goal for these sorts of videos is to show you like different things that you can use and like the outcomes of them. You don't specifically have to use these, but you can take little pieces and use them in your own painting and take some of the ideas and concepts behind what I'm doing and try to evolve them or make them your own and adapt them to however you like to paint. So obviously for me, I like to use a lot of fluorescent paint, as I like my models to be quite high in saturation, as I don't really like painting in the grim dark style. However, I do really like that style personally, but I just don't really enjoy painting that style too much. Okay, back to the sponging. And again, I'm just using Thrash metal on this, and I'm just going to do the little movements, create scratches. However, the nice part about this now is that the paint has actually dried within the sponge and it's sort of hardened it. Now all I do is dip the sponge into the paint again with that hardened paint, and that's going to be a bit more sturdy, so you can create a few better scratches in my opinion. So I did actually take it one step further, and I'm using Chrome by Vallejo, which is a super bright metallic. And again, I'm just using this very sparingly, and I'm just doing like a lot of little random scratches, little jolts here and there, all over the base. Next base we're doing is going to be Citadel's Typhus Corrosion. So I am doing this one a little bit different, and I'm just applying the Typhus Corrosion, and then I'm going to be doing the Dirty Down over the top. The thing I like about Typhus Corrosion is that it gives some like grit to it. However, you don't actually need to use Typhus Corrosion to get that grit. You can obviously just put some grit on it, or you can add several other things and sort of make that corrosion yourself. Now this is actually the rust effect that I like the least, but don't get me wrong, I have used this technical paint previously and I do really like the technical paint itself. It's just I didn't like the ending finish. For this next part, I just applied some Dirty Down over the dried Typhus Corrosion. Again, I just randomly placed it all over the base. There isn't too much for this bit, it's just the same as the previous steps, except I didn't actually apply the Typhus Corrosion and mix it in with the Dirty Down. So it's not as fair of a test comparing it to the other ones, but I just wanted to see like what the effect would be if I didn't do it with the Dirty Down. So once all the Dirty Down is dried, I then came in with the Luminous orange again. But on this base in particular, I did go a bit too much with the Luminous orange, and I definitely feel after looking at the final product that I should have dialed back on the orange a bit. I think what may have affected the orange while looking at this one, and the orange sitting just on the brown itself, I feel like maybe I could have built up the layers a bit more, as the previous products that I've used, such as the Vallejo, Galvanic, Corrosion and the light rust, they're a bit more orangey than just going straight onto the Typhus Corrosion and Dirty Down. I had a bit more of a foundation there for the orange to sit within it. But overall, this is kind of what I wanted. I wanted to show you the differences of the pigments to the Dirty Down, to the Typhus Corrosion, to the Galvanic Corrosion of Vallejo products, you know, that sort of thing. So it's quite nice to see how they work solo. In the last part, I do use a combination of the products. Once the orange is dried, I then come to the dry brushing again, just using Leadbelcher. But this time, obviously, the Typhus Corrosion added texture with the grit, which the dry brush picked up heavily. And you can sort of see like all the different little bits on the base now getting metallic, which I'm not too big of a fan of. I think if you want to use Typhus Corrosion, I think you should probably use it on metallics itself instead of using it and then using metallics over it. But this base in itself does come out a bit bright, and yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it. Next up, I just grab the sponge again and I use Thrash and Metal. Again, I'm just dry brushing, dabbing it off, and then just creating like these little scratches. And again, as I previously mentioned, I did go a little bit crazy on this base in particular. You will see in the finishing shot that it is a lot brighter to the other one, which is my bad. So definitely try to learn from my mistakes here. And for the final scratches, I just used Chrome again by Vallejo, and again, it's just so bright. I just pushed it even further, and it's just, in my opinion, just doesn't come out well. But I don't want to make these bits too long because you've already seen them already. Next up is just using the fluorescent orange. I've done it a bit different this time just because I wanted to see like the outcome of it, and yeah, I didn't really like it this way. It just felt too bright, and with the metallics being very, very bright as well, it didn't really feel right. It wasn't the sort of effect that I was trying to go for with this. However, I am going to leave it how it is. So for the final base, I'm doing a mixture of the techniques and the products that I really liked and what I thought came out the best. So my favorite was the first one. So I'm starting off with Dirty Down, and then I'm going to be putting in some of the Vallejo Rust and the Vallejo Galvanic Corrosion. I'll keep this base a bit shorter. So all I'm doing is I've used Rust and Galvanic Corrosion. Now I'm going on to the Rust from AK, as this was my second favorite and I just wanted to see how it looked. I mainly used the light Rust and I didn't really use the dark Rust for this one. So I'm just putting on the pigments and then I'm just getting some water and dabbing it down. Then I felt like I wanted a bit more Galvanic Corrosion, so I just put a bit more in some of the recesses, sort of just placing it in random locations again, sometimes within the previous rust layers, sort of blending them up a bit, and just generally trying to see what these effects look like together. Next up again is the Luminous orange, and that is going in all the areas where the Galvanic Corrosion was. Next is the Fluorescent orange, and again I think I go a little bit too heavy on it here, but I'm just placing that within the Luminous orange. So when you're using this, please just use it very sparingly. I thought I did in this final one, but apparently I didn't. But you'll see the outcome in a second anyway. Watching this back, I absolutely did not use it sparingly. I just went all in. So learn from me, guys. Like, do not use a lot of fluorescent orange on rust effects. A little bit will do, and that is enough. And when I say a little bit, just like a small little dot. Next up is a very light dry brush of Leadbelcher over the top. Just trying to catch all the edges and give it a good layer. Now is the Thrash Metal. Again, I'm just using the sponge, trying to get them nice, sharp, short scratches. Try not to go too far with this. Again, I feel like I do a little bit, but I mean, it looks kind of cool. If you do too much of it, it can make it look not great. Last but not least is Chrome by Vallejo. And again, I'm just using the sponge and just doing short, quick scratches. I'm being very, very careful with this as it is super bright and you don't want to put too much on it. Alright, so moving from left to right, we have Vallejo, we have AK Pigments, we have Citadel, and then we have a mixture of Vallejo and AK as they were my favourite. Personally, I think I've done the Citadel one a bit of injustice because obviously it looks super, super bright and I don't think it looks the best. However, I think if I had to rate them, it would be the first one, the fourth one, second, and then third. Let me know what you think if you intend to try any of these. Thank you all for watching and I'll see you in the next one.